All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Reagan Starks. I am the program director of the Baseball Heritage Museum in Historic League Park in Cleveland, Ohio. I am here with author Scott Longert. He has agreed to do a show and tell with some photographs I'm going to show him about with Ray Chapman and League Park, and hopefully it will be a great presentation. I would like to thank the Ohio Humanities grant that allows us to do this series, and I will show Scott these slides and we will get going.
Okay, great.
Right. Scott, if you want to introduce yourself more than I have, feel free.
Well, hello, folks. I'm Scott Longert, local author here in Cleveland for probably too many years, actually. It's interesting that the actual 1920 World Series would be starting on this Monday, 100 years ago exactly, Monday, October 5th, and would go through the 12th. The Indians would go ahead and win the series 5-2. Really a terrific series, the first victory for Cleveland in a World Series since 1901, when they first joined the American League. So it was a time where fans were really anticipating, and the Indians came through with a big victory and a world championship, which was great for our city. Okay, here we go.
We got everything screen sharing. Let me start with our first photo.
Great. Okay.
All right, our first photo is this photo of Ray Chapman with his dog.
Yeah, there we have Ray. I'm guessing the way he's dressed, he might have been hunting or something with the socks pulled up there and doing, which a lot of the ball players like to do. Ray Chapman, in our history of Indians baseball, is one of our best shortstops ever. I mean, we've been really blessed. Right now we have Frankie Lindor for maybe another year, hopefully, but really a tremendous shortstop. Omar Vizquel, that hopefully will be a Hall of Famer. We had Lou Boudreau, player manager in the 30s and 40s, a Hall of Famer. And Ray was replaced by Joe Sewell, just fresh out of the University of Alabama, and was forced to come to the big leagues, whether he was ready or not. But he proved to be an excellent shortstop and a Hall of Famer himself. So the ball club has had some terrific shortstop where Ray Chapman ranks really, really near the top. From everything I've read and studied, he could do it all. He could make all the plays at shortstop. He could go in the hole. He could go to his left. Very good at the double plays, and really good at circling back in the outfield and pulling in pop flies on the left field line or the opposite way towards center field. Just a great all-around ball player and a good hitter, and one of the best bunters in the league, probably one of the really great bunters when that was an important facet of the game. He could move guys along, get them in scoring position for Speaker and Elmer Smith to knock in the runs. He could steal bases, a great base stealer, had good speed, and his off the field personality, really a very likable guy, a friendly guy. Had probably the most friends of anyone on the team, including most of his teammates, several who would call Ray his best friend. Very, very amicable guy. I've read that on road trips after dinner, Ray would go into the parlor car, and usually there was a piano there. Ray could play and sing, and he would entertain for a while. And folks traveling on the train would hear the music. They come by and stand by the piano, and Ray would entertain for an hour or two on the trip, something that he liked to do. Very likable guy, as I've said. He was married to Kathleen Daly. Her father owned Ohio Gas at the time, and Ray was set up to be an executive there when he retired from baseball. And there was a lot of talk that Ray was thinking about stepping down. The only reason he was staying in the game was because he wanted to get one World Series with his good friend Tris Speaker.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he didn't quite do that.
Yeah. If you want to talk about what happened to Ray.
Do we have a question or?
Oh, no, I was just checking to see if we had a question.
Oh, okay. Anyways, 1920 was our great year. And for most of the season, things went like clockwork. We jumped out ahead in April. We won 8 out of our first 11 ball games. We increased the lead in May. Going into June, everything looked good. So the Indians were really the hot ball club in baseball, and the fan base was excited. The newspapers were very excited. So things were just as good as they possibly could be.
Yeah.
However, we came to the middle of August and an important series with the New York Yankees in New York,
Yeah.
playing there for a 3-game series. We were battling the Yankees and the Chicago White Sox, who the guys from the Black Sox scandal were still playing ball. They hadn't gone to court yet, or they hadn't got a verdict from Judge Landis. So the Sox had a great ball club. Joe Jackson was having one of the great seasons of his career. Most of those guys were playing well in Chicago. So it was tough competition, but the Indians really were very, very strong. We came in August to come into New York. And the fateful day, of course, Carl Mays was pitching, the submariner, who threw the ball high and tight quite a bit. He often was near the league leaders or led the league and hit batters. And he unfortunately habitually hit a lot of guys in the head. The year before, he hit Tris Speaker in the head at League Park, and Tris went halfway down the baseline and yelled at him, and Mays yelled back. There nearly was a fight, but cooler heads prevailed. Then also in that same season, he hit Indians' Doc Johnson, our first baseman, Doc Johnston. The ball was going right for his head, but Johnston, a lefty, moved his arm up and the ball hit him in the wrist. He was out of the lineup for several weeks. The wrist wasn't broken, but it was painful enough to keep him out of the lineup. So the Indians were aware of what Mays could do. So was the rest of the league. He was not a popular guy, not a friendly guy. So all this was going on that fateful day in August. The game went to the 5th inning, and Ray Chapman came to bat. It was an overcast day. It had rained earlier. The skies were gray. The baseball was very dirty, as just a week or so before, Judge Landis had issued a ruling to the umpires not to throw out any game balls unless they were absolutely necessary. The owners had complained about the high cost of buying new baseballs, and it was setting the poor owners back maybe another $25 to $50 a month, and it was crippling them. It was just a trivial amount of money, but that was typical with the owners. So the ball was probably wet, had grass stains, was dirty, not easy to see. And all these factors went into play when Mays delivered a high inside hard one, and apparently Ray never saw the ball. He never moved. He liked to crouch, sometimes almost lean over home plate, and then move back at the last second before he'd take his swing. On this occasion, he didn't move. The ball hit him square on the left temple. He collapsed right at home plate. Luckily, there were a few doctors in the stands that came out to see to him. They had smelling salts and were able to revive Ray. He was able to stand up with the help of a couple of teammates, and he sort of half walked, half stumbled. They were trying to get him to the clubhouse past left field. But before he left the diamond, before second base, he collapsed again and had to be carried all the way to the clubhouse. An ambulance was called. He was taken to the hospital where a surgeon was waiting. They quickly discovered he had a fractured skull. They believed they needed to operate to relieve the pressure on his brain. Ray was unconscious, unable to speak. And there's several stories that he spoke briefly to people, and it's hard to tell which is accurate, which isn't. But one story that seemed credible was he had a ring that Katie, his wife, gave him that he wore all the time. But before each game, he'd take the ring off and give it to Percy Smallwood, the team trainer, to hold for until the game was over. Supposedly, when he was in the clubhouse, he woke briefly and murmured, Katie's ring, Katie's ring. Smallwood was there. He got the ring, put it on Ray's finger, and then Ray lapsed into unconsciousness. And supposedly, those were the last words he spoke, if he had spoken at all. The operation took place at a New York hospital. They took out of his skull a 2-inch piece of bone that had broken loose. They tried to relieve the pressure on his brain, and he went into recovery. For a brief time, his pulse was normal and his heart rate was down, and they thought briefly he might be recovering. But by the middle of the night, his pulse went down, his heart rate went down, things looked grievous. And in the middle of the morning, I think it was between 3 and 4, Ray Chapman passed away. Now, several of the teammates were there at the hospital. Her speaker was there. but most of the guys were home in their hotel. They knew Ray was hurt badly, but I don't think any of them thought he was going to die from the injury. They would find out in the morning when they would go to the hospital to check on him, and they were told Ray had passed away. You can imagine the guy's reaction. One of their closest friends, a happy-go-lucky guy. His wife was 6 months pregnant already for their first child. Everything in the world was happening for Ray Chapman, and now it was all gone. He was dead. Speaker had to call Cleveland to let Katie know that Ray had been seriously hurt. He wouldn't say that Ray had died because he was worried about Katie's condition and the baby. She got on a train with one of her best friends and made the ride overnight all the way to New York. When she got there to her hotel room, she was told by Speaker that Ray had died. And she is said to have murmured, "I knew it was too good to be true. I knew everything with us was just wouldn't last. I knew it." And it was a horrible blow to her and to everybody. Despite this, the Indians had to finish the series. The funeral was going to be held a couple days later in Cleveland. So the guys had to play a game and then ride the train all the way back to Cleveland for the funeral. And it was held downtown at St. John's Cathedral. Supposedly over 10,000 people were there. And there had been a drive called Roses for Ray. The public was asked to contribute a dime or a quarter, much as they could, to buy roses. And when people got to the funeral, they discovered several thousand roses all there for Ray. And it was quite a gesture on the part of the people of Cleveland and the ball club and everybody involved. It's a very sad day, the funeral. The worst part of it was the guys had to try and get it together in a few hours, then get on a train to Boston and go ahead and play Boston in another series. The guys weren't up to it. They lost both games badly. They went into a tailspin and fell out of first place. Things looked bleak, but somewhere along the line, guys started talking and said, Ray wouldn't want us to be like that. He would have wanted us to go after it and still win the pennant. And they came up with the battle cry, "Win it for Ray." And the guys started to play ball again. They got back into first place. They held off the late charge from the White Sox and the Yankees there. And they did win the pennant in 1920, will go on to win the World Series. And when the series was over, the team voted a full share to go to Katie, Ray's widow. The baby would be born a bit later and would be named Ray. She was a girl named R-A-E in honor of her dad. But unfortunately, things never got better for the Chapman or the Daly family, as Katie, years later in the late 20s, would commit suicide in California, and her daughter Ray would get the measles and die from it around almost at the same time. So Ray, his wife and daughter were all gone within a short period of time, and the Chapman family, which was going to be one of the great families of Cleveland, was no more. It was really just an awful time for people involved, connected with Ray and his family.
Yeah. All right, now we have this photo from home, or this sketch from home plate.
That's one of my favorite photos. What you'll see there is Steve O'Neill blocking the plate, and he's maybe a foot or foot and a half away from the plate. He didn't care. He loved the contact, a very tough guy. You see there, the runner, I think it might have been Ed Connectity, their first baseman, has nowhere to go. O'Neill's leg is in front of him. He can't even touch the plate from there, and he would be called out. And this was nothing unusual for Steve O'Neill, really one of the toughest catchers in all of baseball. O'Neill came from a coal mining family in Pennsylvania. He and his brothers worked in the coal mines when they were young boys. When they were 8, 9 years old, they were down on the coal mines, working 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. Rarely did they ever see the sunlight. They went in the morning when it was dark. They came out of the mines when it was still dark. But it was a way to make a living for a family that came over from Ireland. There weren't many other opportunities. Steve's main job when he was just 8 years old, 8 or 9, was to guide the mules down to the bottom of the mine. They were attached to a wagon, and the miners would load coal onto it. Then Steve would guide the mule back to the top where the coal would be taken off the truck and distributed. Mm-hmm. It was a very dangerous job because the mules could be very temperamental, and they would buck, they would move sideways left to right, and the lane was very narrow. So little boys got themselves pinned against the wall by the mule sometimes, and on occasion seriously hurt. But Steve was able to navigate this, apparently not get hurt, and he graduated when he was age 11 to go outside the mounds with an axe and chop up the large pieces of coal with guys 2 and 3 times his age. That's how strong he was at 11 and 12 years old. On Sundays, I don't know where he got the strength, but he and his brothers had a ball club and they would play on Sundays. And Steve made himself out to be a very fine catcher and a hitter. A lot of the O'Neill boys wound up playing in the minor leagues. 1 or 2 of Steve's brothers played briefly in the majors. And Steve had all that talent, and he was signed by Philadelphia by Connie Mack and sent to the minor leagues. So he was out of the mines. He played well enough to advance several steps. He found himself in Worcester, Massachusetts, playing there. And then this is one of a story I've always loved and read about Steve. And they were playing at Worcester, and there were a group of tough guys that hung out by the ballpark. There were 10 or 12 guys, and they'd harass everybody when the police weren't around. They'd steal purses from women. They'd rough up some of the men and take their wallets. It was an ugly scene, but very little had been done about it. One of these evenings after a ball game, Steve left the park with one of his pitchers. I think it might have been the pitcher who pitched that day. They were walking alone to go out to get something to eat, and here comes the gang of tough guys surrounding them. Well, Steve never batted an eye. He looked at these guys straight forward and kind of shook his head like, yeah, I know. And he said, I guess you guys are up to no good, and that's okay with me. I only ask you send 2 guys at a time. And Steve got in his fighting stance. He was an amateur boxer and a wrestler, and a big guy, 6 feet with a huge chest, and nobody would go forward. Steve just stood there like that. Eventually, the gang dispersed, and that was the end of it. They didn't harass people again with Steve Neal around, who called their bluff and was ready to take on 12 guys. Probably would have whipped most of them, knowing what I do about O'Neill. He liked to spar with his good friend, Johnny Kilbane, the world lightweight champion. The two would go duking it out in the ring, and Steve enjoyed it very well. Back home in Manuka, working out in the gym, he took on a professional wrestler and bloodied the guy's ears until the wrestler said, I've had enough. So this was a guy you didn't want to mess with, and a great catcher, especially in 1920. He had over 300, was tremendous behind the plate. He only missed 2 games the entire year, and that was because he had to go home for the birth of his 2 twin daughters. Otherwise, he would have caught all 154 games. Managers would protest about Steve's tactics that he would block the plate before he had the ball. But the umpires generally looked the other way and let him do it. And he enjoyed getting slammed into, picking up the baseball and tagging the runner out. Didn't bother him in the slightest. And he was a big cog in our 1920 ball club. In our first win in game 1, Steve had 2 doubles and knocked in a couple of runs to get us off to a great start to help Stan Kovaleski win the first game of the World Series. And that was important because we had our first 3 in Brooklyn, then 4 in Cleveland, and the last 2 in Brooklyn if necessary. But by us winning the first game in Brooklyn, we made it a bit easier to wrap up the series in Cleveland. And Steve was a very big part of that. He would go on to manage in the big leagues. He would manage the Indians. He would get fired. He'd coach our minor league ball clubs. He would manage Detroit. And he was just an all-around baseball guy. He died in the early 60s of a heart attack, but at the time he was still scouting for the Indians and still working in baseball. He lived in Cleveland Heights for many, many years and considered himself a Clevelander. His daughters were raised here, and they lived in the area for a long, long time. And Steve was really identified with Cleveland baseball all the way from his career in the 19-teens all the way up to the early 1960s. Really one of our great ball players that we've had, and one of the best catchers that we'll ever see in a Cleveland uniform.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So now we're going to have 2 interior shots from a little bit earlier than 1920 of League Park. I believe these are 2 of the very few photographs that happened inside of League Park.
And here is our wonderful home, League Park, one of the great ballparks, really. I think it has a special appeal to me, and I know if you're an Indians fan and a fan of Indians history, you like nothing more than going down to the Baseball Heritage Museum and taking a look at League Park and walking out to that baseball field, which still gives me chills when I do that, thinking about all the fantastic ball players that played there from 1891 forward. This look you see here, I believe, is before the expansion in 1909. That's when they put on the second deck. So I think this predates 1909, is probably around 1905 to 1906. The original ballpark, probably a lot of you know, was built in 1891. It was a showplace for the National League. That was the only league at the time. It was held 9,000 people, had luxury boxes for 120. It had modern bathrooms, a powder room for the ladies. It really was a great ballpark. And it stood 20 feet from the trolley line, which was owned by Frank Robeson, also the owner of the ball club. So you pretty much rode the streetcar to get there. You paid the fee, bought a ticket, watched the ball game, probably got a hot dog and a scorecard and had something to drink, then hopped back on the streetcar. All of these profits went to Mr. Robeson and the ball club. So it was quite a ballpark and quite a location for it. Really, so many incredible things happened there. So many ball players played there. We entered the American League in 1901 as a charter member. We're still there, one of the few ball clubs that still remain from 1901, along with Detroit and Chicago and Boston. Early time there, we had the arrival of Napoleon Lajoie joining the ball club in 1902, one of the great second basemen of all time, one of the most popular players. We called the ball club the Naps in his honor. He would play in Cleveland for nearly 10 years, but over that, and be one of our great second basemen and a very early Hall of Famer. I believe it was the second election that Lajoie was put in the Hall of Fame. Elmer Flick, one of our great outfielders, played there at that time, another Hall of Famer, young man from Bedford, who was quite a hitter, quite a base stealer, and a very good outfielder, played for that ball club. Addie Joss, a guy that I'm quite familiar with because I wrote a biography of Addie a number of years ago. He pitched his great games at League Park. The greatest ever was 1908 on October 2nd. We were still battling for the pennant with the Tigers and the White Sox. He faced Ed Walsh on his way to win 40 games in the season. Walsh was impossible to hit, but the Indians were able to scrape a run together, and Addie took no chances. He faced 27 batters. He retired them all for a perfect game, 1-0 win. Fans went nuts. They were yelling in the stands, throwing their hats on the field, dancing outside on the sidewalks. It was quite a moment, but the Indians lost, rather than the Naps, I should say, went to St. Louis, lost the ball game, and were eliminated from the pennant, would finish just a half a game out. One of the really tremendous games. Joe Jackson came to Cleveland in 1910, Shoeless Joe, tremendous hitter, a sure Hall of Famer, but because of the Black Sox scandal, Joe, unfortunately, has been kept out and probably will remain so, at least probably in my lifetime. But Joe was just a fantastic player, playing with Lajoie at the same time. But old Cy Young came back to join us in 1909. Cy, who pitched the first home game at League Park in 1891, pitched again the first game after League Park was refurbished and was still quite a star, even though he was 42 years old. Cy would win his 500th game as a member of Cleveland. He'd go on to win 511 ball games. And all this happened at good old League Park in front of the fans that paid their 75 cents or $1 to watch these guys play. In the teens, we had some decent ball clubs, but our owner, Charlie Summers, who owned the club since 1901, had to give up the club in 1915 because he went broke from some bad business investments and his coal mines went on strike, and Summers was in terrible financial shape. His bankers forced him to sell the club. Though that was a sad time for Summers and many fans who'd known him for years, Jim Dunn stepped forward and bought the ball club. He was called Sonny Jim, and he came to Cleveland vowing to bring a winner here. One of the first things he did at the start of the regular season in 1916 was to buy the contract of Tris Speaker from Boston for $50,000, the most money ever paid at that time for a ball player. Overnight, the Indians went from an also-ran to a decent ball club with Tris Speaker in center field. He'd be playing with Ray Chapman and Bill Wamby and Steve O'Neill, and Dunn went ahead and built quite a ball club. And by 1920, they were contending for the pennant, and Dunn had delivered on his word. He said he would spend the money and do whatever it took, and he did. He was able to trade in 1919 for Larry Gardner and Charlie Jameson, two very important pieces of our 1920 ball club. He didn't care about the money or the expense. If it helped his ball club, he would do it. And in 1919, he made the great decision when Lee Fole resigned after a terrible loss to Boston, a grand slam by, of course, a young Babe Ruth. Lee Fole resigned, and Mr. Dunn asked Tris Speaker to take over the club and be our player manager. At first, Tris said no, but he was talked into it. And from that point on, the Indians became a different team. They won a lot of games under Tris in the latter half of 1919. In 1920, we were picked to win it all, and we came through, and we did. And much of the credit should go to Jim Dunn, who's very much forgotten today, but he did what it took. He had no experience in Major League Baseball or minor league baseball, but he came to Cleveland, learned everything he had to quickly, and became a great owner. But unfortunately, he died 2 years later of heart failure. The ball club was left to his wife, and we were in a state of flux until she sold the ball club in the late 20s to Alva Bradley, and then a new era of Cleveland baseball would begin.
All right, we have one more League Park picture. It's a different view of League Park.
Yeah, here's the guys warming up. Looks to be, might have been from that same photographer. You can see guys in dark jerseys that are sort of to the left center of the screen. I'm guessing that's the White Sox or possibly the Tigers, and the Indians are there in white. I mean, I'm totally wrong. The Indians are wearing blue, but I think that's what it was, and they're all getting ready for the start of the ball game. There seems to be a number of people in the seats, so this might have been an early game in April or some game of importance. But again, you see the ballpark, the way it's laid out. It's just great for fans to be able to watch the game and have a really nice view of the ballpark. In the latter part of the 1920s, Alva Bradley took over the ball club at League Park. He was a Clevelander who wanted to promote the city of Cleveland. And he thought by owning the ball club and making that as a real important part of the city, he'd draw people here from out of town to come watch a game at League Park, stay in a hotel, have several meals at the restaurants, and spend some money in Cleveland. That was his idea. He wanted to build a good ball club. He did, but he wasn't able to put a pennant winner together in the 20 years that he owned the ball club. It was a long haul. But he did bring in a lot of great guys who played at League Park in his regimes. Very early on, he brought in Earl Averill to come and play center field, one of our all-time greats and a Hall of Famer. Hal Trosky came in to play first base, one of our all-time power hitters, just the classic first baseman, big and strong, a lefty who could power a ball a long, long way. In one of his seasons, he hit 42 home runs. Just a tremendous ball player, a real asset to Cleveland. We had other good guys that came through here. Eddie Morgan, a good home run hitter, some decent pitchers. Mel Harder got his start in the late 20s and pitched for the ball club through the 1940s. Willis Hudlin, another very good pitcher. And a lot of guys who came in, like Wes Farrell, another really good pitcher who won 20 games 4 years in a row, but was always at odds with the management, a hot-tempered guy who eventually get traded away. Probably Bradley's best accomplishment was having the ball club when Bob Feller joined the team. Even though Bob was signed illegally, and we were very lucky to be able to keep him, Bob came up as a 17-year-old and made his debut at League Park. And soon after that, he would be quite a star. As 18 and 19-year-old teenager, be one of the great pitchers in the ball game. Along with Mel Harder, we had a fairly good pitching staff and some very good ball players. Lou Boudreau would join us in 1939, playing a lot at League Park. But at this time, Bradley was thinking about playing ball games at Municipal Stadium. Of course, what he did, he installed lights there for the 1939 season, so 7 ball games were automatically played there at the nighttime, one against each team in the American League. Soon after, they expanded to be playing 14 games at night, then playing some double headers at the stadium, playing Labor Day holiday there, or July 1st or Memorial Day, or games against the Yankees, which always drew a big crowd. In the mid-1940s, we were playing about 30 to 35 games at Municipal Stadium, and the remaining 38 to 40 at League Park. So I believe that Bradley was in the process of shifting the ball club over to Municipal Stadium but we still had many important and exciting games at League Park during that time. In 1940, we had a near miss. We had a great shot at the pennant with 3 games left of the season. The games to be played at Municipal Stadium. But unfortunately, against the Tigers, who had a 2-game lead, we were beaten 2-0 when Bob Feller, who already had won 26 ball games in 1940, lost a 2-0 game to Floyd Giebel, a pitcher that had been promoted from the minors 2 weeks ago, and this would be his last victory in the major leagues. He'd never win another game, and he'd be back in the minors in a very short amount of time. But that was the closest we got to a pennant. In 1946, Bill Veck brought the ball club during the summer, and he said right away he was going to leave League Park the next year. And in 47, we'd play all our home games at Municipal Stadium. And that's the way it was. There were no more Indians games played at League Park. Now, the Negro Leagues would play there for a bit. Our Cleveland Buckeyes ball club would play there. The Cleveland Browns would practice there for a while. But by the 1960s, the area was obsolete and much of it was torn down. Some of the grandstand remained, and the ticket office, which is now the Baseball Heritage Museum, and which I urge you to visit if you haven't, because there's some terrific artifacts there, some great looks at things that happened at League Park and the stadium so many, many years ago that are still very important today. It's wonderful. The park was refurbished, and it is playable. The high school teams play there, and other teams do when available. It's still a great place that we can still honor and visit and know that Cleveland was always a very important part of Major League Baseball and still is today.
All right, thank you, Scott. That was very, very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time out to show us and tell us about those photographs.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Yeah, I have a few questions if you have time.
Yes.
All right, let's see. There is one from a gentleman called Manuel. He said, when were they called the Spiders and when did they officially become the Indians?
The Spiders was our ball club name in 1891 when we opened League Park. We kept the name all the way up through 1899 when we lost the franchise because the owner, Mr. Robeson, bought the St. Louis franchise, and there was no rule against that. And he transferred all the good players there, including Cy Young and Jesse Burkett, all the great players. And the team was so bad, our franchise was revoked. It was revived back again in 1901 by Charlie Summers when the American League began. We were known as a lot of different names then, the Blues, the Broncos, the Bluebirds, it went back and forth. Then we were the Naps because of the great Lajoie. But in 1914, Lajoie got his release. So the following season, they had to come up with a different name. And there's a lot of stories about how it came out to be, who actually named it, who it was named for. But they were known officially as the Indians starting in 1915, and we still are today.
Yeah, I guess then that's my question is, we did talk about this during our panel, but what is your opinion on possibly the name changing?
The name changing, I think it will probably happen. I'd like to see them use the Spiders. I've always liked the name. It has a lot of history to it. We had Hall of Fame ball players as Spiders, and we won the Temple Cup, which was the equivalent of the World Series in 1895. I think they could have a great logo with a spider and a bat, and they could just, people with artistic ability could really put up a cool thing. And I think it'll be a nice thing to be the Spiders. Whatever the front office decides, I do support them. If they keep the name, or if they decide to change it to whatever, something completely different, I'm okay with it because I think we said on the panel, the most important thing is to go out and watch the Cleveland baseball team and watch those guys play ball. And whether they're the Indians or the Blues or the whatever they might be, it's still our ball club, and it doesn't change a thing, really.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Scott. Again, I am Reagan Starks from the Baseball Heritage Museum. We want to encourage you to come visit us. We are open Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And if you are in the Halloween spirit, we are hosting a Halloween event October 30th and 31st. So please come out and visit that. Again, many thanks to the Ohio Humanities Grant that allowed us to do this today. Thank you again, Scott. I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Reagan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.